Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we are going to paint some gorgeous roses on a thorny tree with a super moody background. Make sure you check out the video description below for a full list of materials, and let's get started. For today's painting, we're going to use a medium that you guys have asked me about a lot, and that is slow dry blending medium. You can also find it in other brands labeled as a retarder or extender. So what this medium is going to do is help us spread the paint farther and be able to come back to different parts of it and blend in more colors. Since I'm using a 16 by 20 inch canvas today, I wanted to make sure that I had enough time to really get my colors blended. Now this medium is really liquid, so pour it onto something where it won't run around too much. So I'm going to pour it into the lip of this plate here. You can also get like a little dedicated pot or jar. Just make sure you're not dipping straight into the bottle so that you don't put paint into this and taint future colors. So I'm just going to put out about that much. I can get more if I need. And I'm going to use this 2-inch flat brush. I've wet it in the jar and then wiped it off on the edge. And I'm going to load up with some of this medium first. And I'm going to start in the darkest part of my canvas. So I'm going to load up with, well, let's start with my blue. Quite a bit of blue. This is the Ultramarine Blue. And I load it up on both sides. And then some black. And I'm going to get quite a bit of black, but nowhere near as much as I got of blue. Notice I only loaded on one side. And a little corner of white, and then just start laying it down. Don't pay attention to your brush stroke directions. You want to give this background kind of a smoky, misty feel. So make sure your brush directions go all different ways. As always, don't worry about blending the two colors together. Just focus on getting the white of the canvas covered. Because we have this blending medium, we don't have to worry so much about the paint drying too quickly. It's not going to give you, a ton of extra time, but it will give you several minutes of extra time. Just a little more medium, more blue, a little more black, a little corner of white. And I used this brush because I think the longer bristles help get a more feathered effect between the colors. So just like when we're using the 1-inch flat brush, you press flatter like that to lay color down and use a very light pressure dusting like that to smooth them together. See how that's giving me kind of a foggy effect where those colors meet? It didn't blend the white out, but it kept that hard line from being there. More medium, more blue. The same amount of black to blue ratio, but I'm going to pick up a little more white. Pressing flat to lay paint down, and then light pressure to feather them together. Just break up that line up there. Don't paint so that you have a big hard line. Letting your paint feather out like that across the top is going to help you blend into the next section. Now, I still have lots of black and blue on my brush, so I'm just going to get medium and white. That's it. And here where I'm using the white, I'll be able to demonstrate the difference between pressing the brush flat and feathering it to blend a little bit better. You'll be able to see that better. So right here, I'm just going to lightly dust over it. And so you get a really nice misty effect. Where here, if I wanted to extend that light color down, I could just push a little harder and deposit more paint. A little more medium and more white. And I'm gonna have less of the blue black on here because I deposited a lot of what was on my brush in this area. And see, whenever I press harder, I get more of that darker color. And a little more white for this top section, and then we'll let it dry. So the blending medium is really cool because then if there's an area that I decide I want to change, I can absolutely do that because it's still wet. See down here, I touched it, it came off my finger, left a mark on the canvas. So I'm gonna clean this off because I don't want to deposit white here. Just a little bit more medium. Load up with that, and I'm gonna get me some blue black and really darken up this bottom area. Maybe a little bit more black than blue for down here. Oh, my brush was still a little wet. And I'm not having drag and other issues that I would have if I were painting wet paint on top of almost dry paint. And I'm still able to blend that up into the other color. That's the one thing I don't like about this brush. It holds so much water. I have water running down my arm right now, and I thought I had gotten enough of the water out. All right, there's our background using the slow dry blending medium. And I hadn't played with the blending medium too much until recently. And I think the last time I did, I thought for some reason it was making my paint really sticky. So I'm not sure what I was doing there. But here, this actually seemed to help make my paint flow a little bit better. It made the paint feel smoother, and I definitely had a much easier time blending colors back in, especially once I got down to the bottom and felt like I needed to add more dark. Without the blending medium, that blue-black at the bottom would have been pretty close to dry, just kind of tacky, and I would have pulled paint and had hard lines between the two colors where they met. But I was able to get that new color blended in pretty well with it. So I'm gonna let this dry now, and it will take maybe 15-20 minutes longer to dry than normal, but you can still use a hairdryer to help it in the drying process if you need to. And I think I may do that. So as soon as this is dry, we'll come back and start on our roses. All right, now our background is dry, and I noticed that using that medium didn't really change the sheen on the paint too much. There's a couple spots that are a little glossier, so I imagine that's where a little more medium got. But it's also, you see how my finger is kind of sticking to it right there where it's shiny. So that could just be that it's not fully cured yet. Now we're gonna draw where our stems and flowers are gonna be. And I'm gonna use a 1/2" angle brush, and I'm just gonna do all of it in black first. I'm gonna block in the whole thing in black. That's the stems, the leaves, and the flowers, all in black. I'm not using any medium here, though we probably will use the blending medium on the next part. So I'm gonna start with my stem down here, and because I'm gonna be going from the bottom up, my angle brush is pointed this way with the tip down. Because remember, the tip of that brush always drags. So I'm going to start here and just kind of draw a line. I'm kind of twisting the brush and letting it wiggle a bit as I bring it up and around. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on there because I'm just kind of sketching out this line to start with. So I think that's good for my main branch. And we'll have another one coming off here, kind of up. Maybe another coming off of it and out. We might do a small one here. Maybe another one up here. And then we can add more as we go. Let's go ahead and fill that in nice and thick where we need it to be. So to make it thicker, I'm just gonna put more pressure on my brush, and that's gonna fatten out that line a bit. You can make this as jagged or as smooth as you want it to be. Rose bushes do tend to be a little bit jagged here and there. These little stems, I'm not quite sure what's going to go on them just yet. Could be a rose, could be a leaf. So I'm not going to fatten them out too much. If I decide it needs to be fatter once I start adding the details, I can do that then. Keep a little extra water on your brush so your paint flows nicely. I get asked a lot of questions about how do I make my paint flow when you're like drawing. And you just do that with a little bit of water. See, I brought a drip over And I'm just gonna mix the paint that's in my brush with that water. That's gonna make my paint flow better so I get crisper lines. Just give it a little jag in there once in a while. And maybe a little elbow here and there. Now we're gonna start painting in where our flowers are gonna be. And I'm using the same brush. And even though we're just using black here, I'm gonna use the exact same brush strokes that I plan on using when we do the color. And that's, first of all, so you can practice the brush stroke a little bit, but also because once it's dry, you should still be able to kind of tell where your brush strokes are, and that will help you out when you start adding the color. So I'm gonna add a little cluster of flowers right here. I don't necessarily need this stem to move into any one of the flowers in particular. So I'm gonna start with the center of the rose, just by making a little line kind of like that, and it can go in any direction. And then I'm gonna do another one underneath it, and another one next to it, and I'm gonna kind of build it like that all the way around. I am gonna fill it all the way in. So let me show you what that brush stroke actually looks like. So I'm not just, coming around like that in a circle. I'm starting with no pressure on my brush. That's how much pressure I'm putting, just touching. And then as I bring it around, I'm pressing my brush flatter and then releasing it. So kind of like that. It's harder to do on the bottom of this plate than it is on the canvas. And I'm not worried about these being perfect circles. I'm not worried about parts of it poking out. I'm just getting the general shape. And actually I'm gonna move up to a 5/8 inch angle brush because I want these flowers to be fairly large, and it's easier to do this with the larger brush. So there's one flower. And I'm gonna do another one maybe right here. So see, they're just little curves that kind of build around each other, almost like a windmill. And I'm gonna let these two flowers overlap. And then I think I'll do a smaller one here. Then I'm gonna add a bud, still with my 5/8 inch angle brush. And my bud, the technique, the way I put the brush on the canvas, lightly put pressure on it until it's full pressure and then off, is really gonna be the same way. It's just gonna be a different direction of brush stroke. So I'm gonna start up here and come down, put heavy pressure on, and down. Start up here again and do the same thing. And fill it in, and then you can refine the shape of this if you need to. So there's a bud. This flower up here, I'm gonna do a little bit different. So if you put the center of the flower in the center of the shape, it's gonna appear that the flower is facing you. If you want the flower to appear somewhere else, you just put the center of it slightly off center of the shape. So I'm going to start with the center of the flower up here. And then I'm going to build kind of down and around it. As I get down here farther, I'm going to put heavier pressure to really get some large shapes. And then here, I'm going to smooth this down into the stem. I'm gonna bring this branch out just a little bit more. You can use a small round brush here if you're more comfortable with that. And I'm gonna add another bud. So again, I'm gonna start at the tip of the flower, come down, push, and bring it around. And then smooth it into the stem. And then right here, I'm gonna come off of the stem, maybe twice off of this one. I'm gonna go back down to my 1/2" angle brush, and I'm gonna draw a couple of very tiny buds. So it'll be similar to this bud, except it's not gonna have the 2 points on the end and it's gonna be smaller, so just kind of a football shape. Smoothed into the stem. And you can do it from any direction that you're comfortable with. If you're more comfortable starting at the stem and going out, that's fine too. Just remember to smooth it into the stem. All right, I'm gonna add the rest of the flowers and then we'll come back and do some leaves. Right, now we're gonna start adding some leaves. And I'm still using my 1/2" angle brush. I'm just gonna get some black. And I'm gonna draw a little stem where I want some leaves to be. So just about like that. Now, rose leaves tend to grow in these clumps of 5. There's 1 on the end and then 2 on either side. So I'm gonna do it the same way as I did those small buds, just kind of a football shape. And another one off of each side. Well, 2 of them off of each side. And this one needs a stem. We'll bring it down. Just kind of connect it there. And we'll do some more leaves here. Now when I'm doing this part, since it's all in black, I'm not paying attention to what is around it. So I'm not going to try and make my leaves avoid any of my flowers. Because once I start filling it in, I can decide if a leaf is in front of or behind a flower. So see, I just took that right over top of that flower and into it. So I'm just gonna add a few more here and there. and then we'll let the black dry and move on to filling in the colors. You can really get crazy with these leaves. Add as many as you want. There's no limit. You can just absolutely fill this entire canvas with leaves and flowers. I think I'm going to add one more flower right here. I just feel like I've got kind of a big empty spot. This one might be a little on the smaller side. And maybe one little set of leaves poking out from behind it. Okay, now we're gonna start highlighting our tree trunk, and we're gonna do it first and then move to the leaves and then move to the flowers. So I got a little bit of burnt umber, and I still have my Mars black, and I got a little fresh titanium white. And I'm gonna use the blending medium again, just a little bit. And I'm still using my 1/2 inch angle brush. So first I'm gonna take just a little bit of black and mix it with my burnt umber, just so I get a nice dark color. And then I'll mix a little of this blending medium in with it. And all I'm doing is just going over top of the black. I'm not trying to cover all the black. If some of it peeks out, that's okay. The black base is really going to help keep some dimension in these stems and in the flowers and everything. It'll make the shadows not quite so hard to work for. I am going to work in small areas at a time, even though I'm using the blending medium, just because I want to make sure that I can blend this as well as I need to. So I have the black-brown mixture on there, and you probably can't see that right now because it is pretty dark. But now I'm going to grab just a tiny speck of white. Can you see it's just like a pinpoint of white? And I'm going to mix it in with my black-brown and keep a little of that blending medium on here. Decide where your light source is. So is it coming from the bottom up or from the top down, or is it coming straight on? Whatever is easiest for you. And just be fairly consistent with it where you place it. So I'm just using the edge of the brush, and I'm going to start kind of slashing down one side or the other. Actually, that's not how I'm going to do it at all. I'm going to turn my brush so the angle is pointing down, And I'm going to come up and let my brush strokes go outside of my trunk here and there, because that's going to help give the impression of thorns. And if it starts getting too light, you can just mix up a little more black brown, a little bit more blending medium, and just go back over the part that you feel like is too light. And just like when we've done tree trunks like this, you can do this as many times as you want. Don't be afraid to keep going over it. If it's getting too muddy, then just let it dry and come back to it. I'm going to keep this side fairly dark under here, but I'll let my brush stroke go outside of it a little bit here and there. As we get up into the area with the lighter background, you'll be able to see that a little bit better. But let's add some more highlight. So I got a little bit more white. That's a little gray. I'm going to add some more brown. There we go. A little bit of blending medium. And again, just on the areas that I feel like are going to be the lightest. A little bit outside. And then if it's not blended enough for me, grab some more of the dark and just lightly go over the line. I'm putting such little pressure on my brush that really the only reason I know it's touching the canvas is because I can see it. I can't feel the brush touching the canvas here. You could go lighter than that, but because this is the darkest part of the background, I feel like the light source wouldn't be that strong here. So I'll probably go lighter than that as we work our way up. All right, some more black brown. A little more medium. And I'm gonna apply that color all through here. Coming up my stems a little bit. I'm just gonna get a bit of black and make sure that my shadow on this underside is nice and strong. Again, barely touching. I only know it's touching because I can see the paint being deposited. A little bit of white and a little blending medium. And again, I'm going to come up the stem so that I can go outside of it a little bit. Just here and there. I'm not going to go outside of it on all of the little stems. Mostly where there's a flower. So like on the ones with the little leaves, I'm not really going to go outside of it and create thorns. Just keep mixing up some of that darker color as you need. A little straight black if you're having a hard time getting your shadow back in. And let's go just a little bit lighter on the highlights right through here. Just in a few places, we'll just start kind of introducing it. Maybe a little on these little stems. A little of my darker color to blend in any hard lines I don't want. Don't worry about the base of your flowers right here. Just worry about the stem part. We're gonna do something different there. Just remember to keep a little bit of that blending medium right near where you're mixing your colors so that you can just naturally mix it in a bit as you go. My brush was getting a little gunked up, so I stopped and cleaned it off real quick. I'm even gonna go a little bit lighter here with my lightest highlights than I went in previous areas. Because this is where I feel like there's the most light on the flowers. The one downside to using the blending medium is if you're like me and you like to put your hand on your canvas, you run a greater risk of putting your hand in wet paint. So this is where one of those bridge things might come into play. It's like a bar that you can strap to your canvas somehow so that you can rest your hand on the bridge and have that steadiness without putting your hand in wet paint. I've seen those before and I've thought about trying one, but it's just never really been an issue for me enough to seriously consider it. But if I start using blending medium more often, which I might because I'm actually really enjoying it, then I might have to get one of those. Don't be afraid to use your finger if you need to smear paint together. I know there's some of you who don't like to get your hands covered in paint. But it's a proven fact, an actual scientific fact, that if you have paint on your skin or on your clothes or your hair or your face or whatever, that you are a true artist. That's just a scientific fact. Just bringing back some of that shadow down there. If your brush starts getting really gunked up, like can you tell how much paint I have on my brush here? All you have to do is just wipe it on the edge. Just kind of scrape some of it off. Whenever I paint like this, my brush gets really gunked up. I'm sure I'm doing something wrong and that it could be avoided, but I don't really care. Sometimes when I'm painting for you guys, the light in my room is just right for the camera. and that way you're not getting any glare and you can actually see what I'm doing. But it comes with a trade-off, because sometimes that perfect light for you guys actually causes a lot of reflection for me, and I can't exactly see how well anything is blending. So that's kind of where I am right now. A lot of the black that I'm looking at is just kind of shiny. And when I'm adding the highlights on top of it, I just kind of have to trust that they're going in the right place. And then I stop and look at it from time to time to make sure. Just to give you a little insight into what it's like sometimes making these videos. Kind of like right here, all I really see is the light reflecting on it. And see right there, even though that's going to end in the flower, I just take it all the way into it. I'm going to paint over that part, but I just want to make sure that it's as natural looking as possible. And that means that it's going to go in behind the flower. Right here where these are all kind of bunched together, I can start deciding what's in front of what. So I brought this stem in front of this leaf. But when I paint this leaf, I may decide I want it in front, and I'll just paint over the stem with the leaf color. All right, for our leaves, we're gonna do something very similar to what we did on the stems, except I'm gonna use my burnt umber and Hooker's green and mix them together. Just get a nice brownish green. Sorry, you couldn't see that. A nice brownish green. And then I'm gonna mix it in with some glazing, or not glazing medium, the blending medium. And I'm gonna fill in the leaf with that color. And a little bit more so it's not so transparent. I'm not being real neat with it. You don't really have to be. It doesn't have to cover all of that black. And just pretend like your flowers aren't there wherever it overlaps a flower. Now I can grab a little white and mix it in. And I'm going to do a very similar thing. I'm going to start along the edge and just kind of streak it down. Just about like that. And then you can go even lighter. You can go as light as you want to. But still just on the edge. And as I get lighter, I'm putting less pressure on my brush so that I apply less paint. That's making sure that the lightest piece is just along the edge and doesn't overwhelm the rest of the leaf. So that's what I'm going to do on the rest of these leaves. My green brown using the blending medium. Right over top of that flower bud. And then start adding just a hint of white. Running it along the edge. Now here's something that I'm doing when I'm highlighting this edge. So I took my brown and my green and I touched the edge of the white and just pulled it out rather than mixing it. So you can see I have white on this side, and on this side it's almost kind of blended in. So the side that was on my plate when I dragged that way, that's what I'm gonna put on my leaf when I run it over the edge. So it's gonna lightly deposit some of that lighter color. If I were to do it on this side where I have that little bit of a bead. Let me show you what'll happen. See, I get a heavier line, but it's also, I've got a pure white line in the middle there. So that's why I'm going like this and then depositing it like that. But because we're using the blending medium, you can always blend it out if something like that happens. Just get a little bit of your darker color and swipe back over it. And blend it with your finger if you have to. Okay, I zoomed you out a little bit. I'm just going to finish up the rest of these leaves and then we'll move on to our flowers. Don't go too bright with your highlight in this dark area. I know I just went too bright, but I'm just going to finish it and then I can kick it back. With this area being in a little bit more shadow, your elements here might not have quite as much light on them. So I'm just going to cover that a bit, streak it in, smooth it out with my finger. Oh, I forgot a leaf right here. All right, we're in the home stretch. We have the stems and the leaves done. So I'm gonna let this dry completely because I don't wanna drag any of the green or the brown into the roses. So let this dry and then we'll come back and finish up. All right, now the moment you've all been waiting for, we're gonna paint in our flowers. So I got me a new plate because I kind of made a mess of the last one. And I have some Quinacrodone Magenta and my 5/8 inch brush again. So I'm gonna load up with some of this, quite a bit. I'm okay if it's a little bit globbed on my brush. So just like we did with the black, I'm gonna do those same brush strokes, but I'm not gonna try and cover the black. I'm gonna let some of it show. The other thing I want you to pay attention to is if you have a clump of flowers like this, decide which one you want in the front and then do that one last. So I think I'm gonna have this one be in the front, so I'm gonna do it last. So I'm gonna start with this one, which means it will be pushed all the way to the back. So I'm gonna start in the middle with the little swipe and another one. And you should be able to see what I'm doing here a little bit better than when I was using the black. Now, to really get the impression that these are rose petals kind of twisted around each other, each brush stroke, I'm gonna start kind of below the last one. So see, here's my first one, and then that one, and notice there's a little gap right in there. So I'm actually gonna start with the tip of my brush in there and around. And that's pretty much how I'm going to do this. And see, that black shining through helps insinuate some shadows in the flower petals. As I get out farther, I put a little more pressure on my brush, so see that that petal is wider than the first ones that I was doing. And I'm not going to stop where the next flower is. I'm just going to keep going over it as if that other flower doesn't even exist. If you go outside of your black a little, that's okay. So there's my first flower. So I've got some quinacridone on my brush still, and I got a little bit of white. And just like with the leaves, how I just kind of reached in and pulled a little bit of it out like that. Got some on one side of my brush, and there's not really any on the other side. That's pretty much what I'm going to do. And then the same type of brush stroke again. And some of these petals can be a brighter color, a little bit more white. Some of them can be a little bit more on the magenta side. I'm not trying to cover all those petals. Not even necessarily trying to keep it right on those petals. I'm just doing the same type of shape. But I'm going to let the inside be just a little bit darker than the outside. So I'm putting very little pressure on my brush, not really laying down much of that white. Anywhere you feel like you want it a little bit brighter, just grab some more and slash it on there. And that's really all there is to it. Now, before I move on to this flower or this one, I'm going to make sure this one's dry. That way I don't get just kind of a muddied pink color in the middle. That way this one will actually overlap that one rather than blending in with it. So we'll start working on this one. And I didn't clean off my brush, I just wiped it off on the paper towel so I don't get too much white in this next flower. So we're going to do the same thing. Little slashes of color that kind of curl around each other, kind of starting in between each petal. So we get that pinwheel effect. And as I move farther out, I put more pressure on my brush to get wider petals. They don't all have to go the same direction. You can stop and go the other direction if you want to. And they can go outside a bit, that's okay. A little white. So even though this magenta is quite see-through, when I add the white to it, it takes that transparency down a little bit. So where I went outside of my flower here, you can't really tell because the white helps cover it. And we'll keep the inside a little bit darker than the rest of it. Again, I just wiped off the extra paint on my brush rather than cleaning it off. And let's do these buds here. So I'm going to start up at the tip, put some good pressure on there to drag it down, and just went right over top of my leaf. And on the other side. Now, if your flower is wide enough, you can add more than 2 petals to it. So see, I've got that gap in the middle. So I'll just add another one here. So now it has 3 petals, even though I only drew 2. A little bit of white. And I'm going to put a little more white on this middle one. Just so it really stands out. And notice I didn't worry about what's going on in here, where the flower meets the stem, because we're still going to do something different with that part. Wiped off my brush, and we'll do this one. Let's do these little ones before we do the large one. So I wiped off my brush and I just have magenta, and I'm just going to fill that in. This is going to be very similar to how we did the leaves. A little bit of white. and just kind of run it up one side. All right, now this one is going to be a little bit different because it's pointing up, it's not pointing at us. So we're going to start out the same as we did with the black. I'm going to bring that out just a little bit there and maybe there. And then right here, we're just going to kind of fill that in a bit. Get our white. Really highlight these outside petals. A little darker on the inside. And then I'm just going to take a tiny bit of it kind of sideways here with my brush flat. There. This flower is not going to be highlighted quite so intensely because it's in our shadow. Maybe just a little bit on that top part, and that might be really all I do. I didn't wait until this one dried, but I didn't put a lot of highlight on it either, so I'm not worried about these two getting too muddy with each other. And notice how dark I left this one, being that it's in the shadow part. I didn't put any highlight on it really. I just let the little bit of white that was in my brush highlight it, and I added a tiny bit up on this side. All right, this one's about dry. Let's go ahead and do this one. And again, just right over top of that first one. You can add some good highlight there to help hide it. Let these petals, I know that some of you will have a tendency to try and keep everything contained to that black shape, but I'm telling you, don't do that because your flowers will have a really irregular or unnatural shape. So see, I let it come outside of the black, and that gives it more of that petal look. But if you keep it contained exactly in the black, it's gonna look really constricted. This is one of those other flowers that's facing off in a different direction. We're just gonna pretend like you can see that whole area here and just paint it over top of that flower. And see, it just covered up that leaf that I put right over top of it. Okay, one more thing and we're done. So I'm back to my 1/2 inch angle brush and my black paint. And on roses, here where the flower meets the stem, they have these little green pieces that were kind of protecting the bud as it was growing. So we're gonna add those, very similar to the way that we did the little buds, these right up here. So I'm gonna start on the stem and push and bring it up and off the edge of the rose a little bit. Just add a few of those. So see now, because it kind of looked awkward, this flower overlapping that one, but now that we have that little leaf piece there, it separates them visually a little bit more. On these little tiny buds, we're gonna do the same thing, but much smaller, and I'm gonna keep it on the bud a little bit more. a little bit of it can come off here and there. Now once this black dries, if you like, you can go back over it and do like we did with the leaves on top of it so it's not black. That's up to you. I think I'm gonna actually leave mine black. I don't know, we'll see how I feel about it after I'm done. Maybe I'll want to add the green. I think I decided I wanted to just leave it black. So I'm just gonna sign it and call it done. And there are your roses on a dreamy background. I hope you enjoyed this, and I can't wait to see what you come up with. You can share it on my Facebook page or in our Art Monster Squad Facebook group. Both of the links are down below. Also, I recently started a Patreon page, so if you'd like to help me continue to make awesome videos, the link is in the description below, and I've got some great rewards to thank you for your monthly support. My first goal with Patreon is to buy a new lens for my camera, so getting all of the close-ups for today's painting was very time-consuming and difficult, and I feel like I'm not able to really spend the time that I need to focusing on the painting because I have to focus on what my camera is doing. And a new lens would help me get better close-ups, better angles, and be able to spend more time on the painting and not fussing with my camera. If you haven't already, please make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe, and maybe share it with a friend who you think would like this painting too. Thank you as always for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.